Okay, order. I call on Neil O'Brien to move the motion.
And I must start by saying that I know that our numbers in this debate are more select than they might otherwise be if it were not for the fact that many members are taking part in the vital debate on the government's decision to take winter fuel payments away from 10 million needy pensioners. Now, since 1971, it's been a criminal offence for a person who's not a British citizen to knowingly enter this country without leave to do so. And yet, since the start of 2021, over 125,000 people have come to the UK illegally in small boats. That's about 94 people every day. Even in the period since Labour came to power, about 8,400 people have come, about 137 every day. And of course, people also come via other illegal routes, and for obvious reasons, it's difficult to estimate the total number of people in the country illegally, but the numbers are clearly significant. A 2020 report for the Pew Research Centre estimated that at the end of 2017, there were already 800,000 to 1.2 million people living in the UK without a valid residence permit. It's about 1.2 to 1.8% of the whole population. Now, illegal immigration is unfair on those who've played by the rules and come here legally. It undermines attempts to get high-skill, high-wage migration of the kind that all politicians say they want. And it blows a hole in our attempts to keep dangerous people out of the country. It's a huge issue. And many of the people who are coming on the small boats are in reality economic migrants. Not all, but many. In fact, at present, the #1 country of origin is Vietnam, a friendly and peaceful country, but as the Oxford Migration Observatory have pointed out, one where there are lots of strong connections to organised crime for those who are crossing from Vietnam or being trafficked from there. Now, most of the people in the boats are young men. 9 out of 10 are men, and about 3/4 are aged 18 to 39. Few have any documentation. Only about 2% have passports, making it very difficult to prove who they are or where they're from. And coached by the people smugglers, most of them destroy any evidence, pocket litter, SIM cards and the like, that would tell us where they're from. The overwhelming majority will claim asylum, and they know that if they can make it to the UK, they can stay by one means or another, because most will be granted asylum, and of those who are not, very few are removed. In fact, if you look at the period 2019 to 2022, only about a fifth of applications were refused, and only 1 in 20 were actually made to leave the country through enforced or voluntary returns. Asylum grant rates have steadily climbed over recent decades, from less than a third in 2004 to about 4/5 now, and the proportion of those who were ultimately removed has also dropped sharply over the last 10 years. Previously, around a quarter of those who claimed were returned, now it's only around 1 in 20. And many of the people who are not granted asylum simply disappear. In November 2023, the Home Office admitted it does not know the whereabouts of around 17,000 asylum seekers whose claims have been discontinued. Those coming on the small boats know the bottom line. If you can get to the UK, you can stay. And as long as that is the case, more and more people will come. Now, the government is trying to address this, it says, in various different ways, which I will work through in this speech. First, it's trying to process people faster, which in practice means granting more people asylum more quickly. And that means that the costs of the asylum system, in a sense, disappear into the costs of the wider welfare system, but of course the costs in the real world don't go away. And I know that a number of local councils are very concerned that people will shift from asylum accommodation to presenting as statutory homeless and in need of council housing. Now, these trends are quite difficult to get a handle on in the UK, because while lots of other governments are publishing more and more data, in the UK we're publishing less and less. The DWP have stopped publishing data on welfare claims by nationality. HMRC have stopped publishing tax paid and tax credits received by nationality. The Home Office will not answer questions on the immigration status of prisoners, such as were they here legally. The Home Office have the data, but they don't publish it. Nor does the Home Office collect data on the nationality or immigration status of those who are arrested. Asked basic questions like how much it spends on average per night on hotel accommodation, the Home Office says it's commercially confidential. And when it comes to spending programmes like the Refugee Integration Loan Scheme, the Home Office say that they don't know how much they've spent, they don't know how many loans they've made, and they don't know how many have been repaid. This is a pretty shocking way to handle taxpayers' money. And all of it breeds huge mistrust. And it means we can't have a sensible debate about the costs and benefits of different migration policies. So the first question I hope that the Minister will answer is, will she publish the data so that we can at least have a sensible discussion about the facts? Now, the second thing that the government say they are trying to do is to increase deportations of those who should not be here. Obviously, a welcome idea. In some ways, it's surprising one, though, because when the Prime Minister was campaigning to be the leader of the Labour Party, he signed a letter calling for the suspension of a flight to deport 50 offenders to Jamaica and the suspension of all future charter flights. 151 Labour MPs and peers signed that letter. And among those who escaped deportation that day was heroin dealer Avika Heaven, who had already served 4 years in prison and went on to be jailed again in May 2021 for dealing cocaine and heroin. If that was not bad enough, one of the other criminals Labour members so generously campaigned on behalf of, Ernesto Elliott, went on to commit murder. Now, the PM has previously claimed that there is a, quote, racist undercurrent which permeates all immigration law. Nonetheless, I take on trust that a new leaf has been turned over and the government really does want to increase deportations. But we need some clarity on what the government's target and promise is exactly. The Home Secretary, has said that she will, quote, reverse the collapse in removals that has taken place since 2010. Now, as the Minister will know, I was quite critical of the last government on this issue, so increasing deportations would be welcome. But my question to the Minister is, what will the government achieve by when? Are we talking about enforced returns or all returns? By when will we reach what level of deportations? For background, the number of enforced returns was 21,425 in 2004. It declined to 13,938 by 2009. Declined further to just 9,236 by 2018. It then ran at about 3,000 a year during the pandemic when I was flying, fair enough. But then it was back up to 7,190 in the year ending June 2024. So what is the government's ambition regarding enforced returns? Is it only to bounce back to pre-pandemic levels? If so, that will leave it substantially below 2010 levels and about half the rate that we had in 2004. It's not a very ambitious ambition. Or is the government one that also includes voluntary returns? If that is the case, then the Home Secretary's recent announcement that she wanted to get levels up to the highest level since 2018, and I quote, is a very odd target because returns have already increased to above that level. They were 24,938 in 2018 and 29,551 in the year ending June 2024. So she could go backwards and still hit her target, which is hardly a stretching ambition. So my second question that I hope the Minister will answer when she gets to her feet is, what exactly are the government promising, by when, on what kind of deportations? We urgently need clarity. That brings me on to my third question to the Minister. For some countries of origin, like Albania, we've already secured return agreements, and that's been very effective. And with numbers now very high from Vietnam, I'm sure that the government will quickly secure a returns agreement with them. But what does the government plan to do for countries which either won't take their nationals back or which the government won't want to send their nationals back to? Countries like Afghanistan, Iran, and Syria, which account for a very large share of illegal immigration to the UK. I take it that the government are not going to be negotiating returns agreements with either the Taliban or the Ayatollahs of Iran or with Assad in Syria. To solve this problem, governments across Europe are negotiating deals with safe third countries. And last week we got the news that a senior minister in Germany was looking to take up the relationship with Rwanda, which the Labour government have rashly abandoned without any alternative in place. And it's not just Germany that wants to do this. 2 camps are to be built in Albania to house migrants rescued at sea by Italian boats while Italy processes their asylum claims. The EU has ruled that this is legal under European law. Denmark passed legislation allowing for the processing of asylum claims in third countries in 2021. The Chancellor of Austria praised the last government's agreement with Rwanda and said that it was, I quote, a pioneer for us being able to put asylum proceedings in safe third countries. And in May, 15 EU member states wrote to the European Commission backing the creation of centres in third countries. Signatories included Austria, Bulgaria, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Estonia, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Netherlands, Poland, and Romania. So lots of governments are looking at this and responding in a recent letter. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen notes that many member states are looking at innovative strategies to prevent irregular migration by tackling asylum applications further from the EU external border. And she promised to look at this during this European Parliament cycle. The use of safe third countries is not a new idea. Outside Europe, Australia has been intercepting boats at sea and putting people in safe third countries since 2001. Here, Tony Blair's government worked to get a deal with Tanzania to send failed asylum seekers there. And the Blair government also worked to get a deal with other EU member states that would have seen asylum processing in third countries, an idea that's clearly coming back again. And of course, there are differences between these schemes, between sending failed asylum seekers to other countries or processing asylum claims offshore and doing both processing and accepting of asylum claims in other countries. They have different merits, but all of them stop failed asylum seekers from remaining here illegally. And it seems certain to me that this government must and will end up negotiating similar agreements with third countries of its own, which is why it's so rash of them to have trashed the Rwanda scheme with no alternative. So my third question is, having rashly handed over all the work that we did with Rwanda to Germany, will the government now U-turn and start working on third country deals of the kinds that many other countries now have or are setting up? Now, I already mentioned Australia's policy of intercepting boats at sea. And my fourth question relates to that. What will the government do to ensure that people who are intercepted at sea are towed back to France rather than towed towards the UK? And this is an increasingly important point because the small boats crisis has entered a new and more dangerous phase. The average number of people in each boat has been increasing, and partly because of the success of the last government in increasingly intercepting engines, the most difficult element of the people smugglers' kit, partly because we've succeeded in intercepting the engines, increasingly you're seeing very large, increasingly overcrowded boats putting out to sea with really, really small engines. Now, these things are death traps by design. They're not even intended to get across the channel. They're intended purely to get a few miles out to sea and then to rely on being rescued. Other innovations by the criminals, like taking the hard floor out of the boats, have already had deadly and tragic consequences. So the legal argument that there always was under the law of the sea, that these things are by definition a risk to life at sea, has got even stronger. And it shifts the argument for us to turn more of them back to France. I know that French have occasionally allowed these boats to be towed back to France where the circumstances have been acute enough. But the argument has got stronger. So will the Minister commit to doing just this? Because everything we do at every stage to disrupt the people smugglers' business model helps to make it unviable and to stop this evil trade. And this brings me on to my final question to the Minister, which is about what the government are going to do about the underlying reasons why people come from safe third countries to the UK. I said at the start that people know that as long as they can make it to the UK, they'll be able to stay. And as long as they know that, they'll continue to come. Now, successive governments since 2018 have worked with France and other allies to improve enforcement, and there have been some results from that. But on its own, it's not going to be enough. We need people to realise that crossings are futile so that they don't step into a deadly boat in the first place. Now, some people think that we can just solve this problem by granting more visas to people to come here legally, so-called safe and legal routes. Just make illegal immigration legal and problem solved. The problem is that unless we are prepared to have completely open borders and impose no limits at all, there will always be people who come illegally. For example, 2,233 people have come on the small boats who are from India. Now, India is the world's largest democracy, has a booming economy, an impressive space program, and we have given, over the same period the boats have been operating, 1.3 million non-visitor visas to people from India. There are loads of opportunities to come here legally from India, and yet thousands of people have still come here illegally. And that shows you that you can never solve this problem just by saying that we will have slightly more or slightly bigger safe and legal routes. It's true, we have created, quite rightly, a number of additional routes on top of the asylum system. And taking together these humanitarian routes plus the asylum system, we've taken about 500,000 people over the last 5 years. Some of them lived in my house. I had Ukrainian refugees living in my house. But sadly, we cannot have an unlimited scheme for every country in the world that is poorer or more oppressive than the UK, because that is just a very large share of the world's population. According to a 2021 Gallup poll, about 16% of all adults worldwide would say that they would like to leave their own country permanently. If we could, that would be about 900 million people. They're not wrong to want to move to a richer country, but we simply cannot take all of those who would like to move here. So doing things which simply increase the acceptance rate in the asylum system in order to, quote, clear the backlog is likely to only increase the pull factor and encourage more people to take that dangerous journey across the channel. And if we look at the countries of origin that count for most of those crossing the channel, we can see that the grant rates have been increasing dramatically over recent years. Even on initial first-round decisions, acceptances from Vietnam have gone up from about 20% to 60% in recent years. From Eritrea and Sudan, the rates have gone up from 20% or so to about 100%. From Afghanistan and Syria, they're about 100%. But in terms of final decisions and the proportion of people who actually are removed, the figures are even starker. The share of those coming from Vietnam who actually returned has declined from about 2/3 in the mid-noughties to just 1% now. For Turkey, it's gone from half to just 1% now. From Iran, from 1 in 5 to just 1%. But even for friendly countries like India, booming economies, superpowers in the making, it's gone from half to just 1 in 10. Now, there are multiple reasons why your chances of remaining in the UK if you come illegally have increased so much over time. Case law has gradually broadened the definition of groups who are at risk of, quotes, persecution to allow more and more people to come to the UK if their own countries don't meet the very high standards of Western liberal norms. The expansion of the concept of persecution by the courts has left immigration officers facing almost impossible questions of judgment. Are you really a member of this political party or this religion? Do you practice your lifestyle, your faith, openly or quietly? Are you a prominent target? Often there's variation within countries and between different time periods. In some cases, people are actually not being persecuted in their own country, but they argue they would be persecuted if they return, for example, from Eritrea. Military men who have left without permission can be made to do military service. And that is then used as an argument to stay in the UK. Should we have to accept any young man who comes here from Eritrea for that reason? I do not think that just because your country is poorer or more oppressive than the UK, that gives you a right to come to the UK. But that is the direction that judicial activism has taken of us in. Now, to create some accountability and transparency around this, I've pushed for the decisions of the first-tier immigration tribunal to be published rather than kept secret, as at present, but that still hasn't happened. But hand in glove with judicial activism, the Shaw Review and the decline of immigration detention have also made the practicalities of deporting people much harder. But far and away, the biggest legal change has been the growth in case law associated with the European Convention on Human Rights signed in 1950. While the 1951 Refugee Convention had no court or enforcement mechanism at the start, the Convention, of course, has its own court in Strasbourg. And unlike Germany, the UK has a dualist legal system, meaning that treaties don't directly apply. So the UK was historically able to ignore rulings of European court. But in 1998, the Blair government incorporated the Convention into domestic law, meaning people could use their ECHR rights in the domestic courts directly. I think Tony Blair may have regretted this very quickly, because in 2006, the courts ruled on the case of 9 Afghans who hijacked an airliner in Afghanistan and held its occupants at gunpoint for 4 days at Stansted Airport in 2000. The court granted them leave to remain in this country in a claim heavily based on ECHR rights. Now, case law has shifted the meaning of some of the very vaguely defined rights in the Convention in a way that would have stunned their original signatories. As an example, a government consultation listed some case showing how the balance has shifted, and I'll mention some of this debate. Take Case X, a foreign national who had leave to remain in the UK, committed a series of crimes including common assault, battery, destruction of property, and grievous bodily harm. In the case of Case X, the Immigration and Asylum Tribunal found it would be a disproportionate interference with the appellant's rights to deport them given their relationship with their child. Or if we take Case AD, a Turkish national who was convicted of an offence of grievous bodily harm and sentenced to 54 months imprisonment. In September 2019, the first-tier tribunal allowed his appeal against deportation on human rights grounds, and then after protracted litigation, relying on his period of lawful residence and marriage to UK national, the upper-tier tribunal allowed the appeal on Article 8 ECHR grounds. Or take the case of OO, a Nigerian national convicted of intent to supply crack cocaine and heroin and 2 offences of violence. In 2020, the first-tier tribunal allowed his appeal against deportation, again on Article 8 ECHR grounds, and the upper-tier tribunal upheld these findings, relying on what it called OO's significant obstacles to integrating back in Nigeria. I don't think any of these decisions were what Winston Churchill intended when he set up the Council of Europe. And Jonathan Sumption, one of our leading jurists, is right to say these incredibly vaguely defined rights are a danger to democracy. ECHR rights are being used to block us from doing many of the things that we need to prevent people from people who arrive here illegally from lying about their age. A recent Freedom of Information request released by the Home Office makes it clear that many people are lying about their age. We can now see that supposedly there are 50% more 16-year-olds arriving here than 18-year-olds, and there are also 50% more 20-year-olds than 18-year-olds, leaving a suspicious dip in the numbers around the age 18. But the medical examinations that would stop us, or would enable us to stop people from lying about their ages, are often barred by ECHR rights. And we saw a tragic case of a dangerous person lying about their age in the case of Langwaheen Abdul Ramazai, who claimed to be 14 when he was actually 19 and went on to kill Tom Roberts, an aspiring Royal Marine. That awful and dangerous case showed in multiple ways how the system elevates the rights of dangerous people over the rights of people in this country who just want to stay safe. Now, enforcement is very, very important. And I hope the Minister will let us know when the head of their new Border Security Command is going to be appointed. It's been several months now. It's essentially just a rebadging of things that already existed, but it's still not good that the post has remained vacant for so long. Perhaps the Minister will tell us that someone has now finally been appointed. But ultimately, there are limits to what enforcement can do. Tony Smith, the former head of Border Force, has pointed out that just relying on enforcement alone is like playing whack-a-mole, because you could shut down one gang and just another one will always pop up. And that's why he calls the decision to scrap the Rwanda scheme a rash one. Those who come on the small boats, they know the bottom line. If you can get to the UK, you can stay. And until we change that, more and more people will force their way into this country illegally. That is not fair on British citizens. It's not fair to legal migrants in this country. It brings significant costs to the British taxpayer, and it lets dangerous people into our country. During the election, I met many, many people who were in despair about the small boats. They feel it's just profoundly unfair, and they feel like the rights of people who force their way into this country are considered to be more important than their rights, and they are right to feel that way. Now, I was critical of the last government, but I'm not optimistic about the current government fixing any of these things. But perhaps the Minister will prove me wrong when she gets up to answer today. At the very least, I hope that she will answer directly some questions. First, will the government publish the data that DWP and the Home Office currently keep secret? Second, will the government set out a clear, measurable and specific target for removals and a date on it? Third, will the government U-turn and start talks to create third country agreements of the kind that they've just abandoned? Fourth, will the government start to tow boats back to France, given the overwhelming risk to public safety and the clear legal arguments for doing that? And above all, finally, and fifth, will the government start to address the deeper reasons why illegal immigrants and people smugglers know that if they just force their way into the UK, they'll be able to stay?
Can I remind members that they should bob if they wish to take part in the debate? The question is that this House has considered illegal immigration. Now, given the length of the opening speech and the amount of time we have available, I'm going to try and limit each member to about 5 minutes, with the exception of the two front benches. So I call, first of all, Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will not take 5 minutes. Like so many of my neighbours and the people I represent in Plymouth, I served our country in the armed forces. And we are really proud of that, the armed forces community. And for us and our families, national security and the security of our borders is paramount. 9 weeks ago, we came into government and we inherited a dire situation from the outgoing Conservative government. Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, they have lost control of our borders. I'm so proud that this Labour government will regain control of the situation by creating the Border Security Command. This will draw together the best of British security personnel from the National Crime Agency, the Border Force, and the finest intelligence officers in the world. We will together better protect our borders, and we will actually, for the first time in many, many years, go after the criminal gangs that are facilitating and profiting from these crossings. But, Mr. Chair, there's a huge human element that is so often left out of these conversations. And last week we saw a truly horrific loss of life in the Channel. 12 deaths, including 6 children and a pregnant woman. One of many such incidents so far this year alone. We must never allow ourselves to become inured to this kind of tragedy and the loss of life, especially that of children. But sadly, the one set of people who we know do not care about that loss of life are the smuggling gangs who are responsible for putting people on these terribly overcrowded boats. That is why, to tackle the small boats crisis at its source, we must smash the criminal gangs. Unfortunately, we are... Yeah.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. We keep hearing this slogan, smash the gangs. Does he not realise that when you smash a gang, there's another 20 gangs ready to step in place to take that gang's place and carry on the people smuggling? What we need in this country, I'm sure he will agree, is a deterrent, is to get people to stop wanting to come to this country in the first place.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I think the UK is, for me, the best country in the world. I don't think we should try and make our country a less good place so that fewer people want to come here. That's not the route to go down.
Can I intervene on that?
Yeah.
So I've worked for the National Crime Agency in the past and also in a counter-terror role. So there are ways that we can deal with this. The fact is, under the previous government, what they'd set up only dealt with the processing of those that arrived. So the new Border Security Command, what it can bring in is not just enforcement, but also disruption, which will ensure that they aren't even getting onto the boat. So there's not just one way of cracking this nut. And if we bring in the likes of MI5 with new counter-terror powers, those tools, that culture of disruption, then it can have a massive impact. And I've been a part of that in the past, and I've seen it happen, so it can work, and I have full faith in
Can I ask for interventions to be quite short? Yes. And also, for those who are intervening, it's actually subtracting time for those who do want to speak in the debate. Later on, I'll call Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the honourable friend for Dover and Deal, not only for his comment, but for his fantastic service to this nation, where he's worked actually in those organisations who keep us safe, not just commenting from the side, so thank you. The inheritance from the previous government was dire. When Labour took office, it was against a backdrop of record small boat crossing numbers. This year alone, so far, 13,489, the last numbers that I saw. Astonishing numbers that represent a total loss of control. Of course, we're not going to turn that round within 9 weeks of office. So let's not forget the situation that we're inheriting. Net migration trebled since 2019. Meanwhile, the Rwanda scheme, which we've heard about today, it's already cost taxpayers more than £700 million, and we've sent 4 volunteers to Kigali. It's an expensive trip. Had the Conservatives returned to power, they intended to spend £10 billion over 6 years on the same failed policy. So will the Minister please assure my neighbours, the people I represent, the armed forces community in Plymouth, that this situation is going to turn around under the new Labour government? Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and it is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chair. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for Arborough, Oadby and Wigston for securing this very important day. It's just a shame that there's not more people in here today. I take issue with... I want to choose my words very, very carefully in this debate because, words and language are important. But we need to get tough in this place about this problem, this illegal migration. And I keep hearing time and time again that these people are fleeing war-torn countries. They are desperate people fleeing persecution. Well, let me tell you this. I've been to France. It's quite a nice place. There's no war in France. They're not persecuted in France. And I served on the Home Affairs Select Committee for 2 years. I went to the camps in Calais, and these young men, and the first thing we noticed was they were all young men. There was no women, no children, no families. They were young men between the ages of about 16, 17 and 30. And they all said the same things to us. El Dorado. They would point at the White Cliffs of Dover and say El Dorado. They wanted to come to this country because they thought that the streets were paved with gold. And they are paved with gold if you're coming from a country like Eritrea or Sudan. And the most annoying part for me was there was a charity there called Care for Calais. And these would attract these people. They give them the coordinates in whichever country they came from. They would take weeks and weeks or months to get there. Once they got to the camp, the Care for Calais would set up a school, teach them how to learn English, how to speak English, how to write in English. They'd give them new phones, new data, shelter, whatever, and get them ready for the crossing to the UK. And then I just take issue with the honourable member. He said once they get to England, then they're never leaving. It's once they get in the Channel. Once they get in the Channel, they're picked up and ferried to our country. And when they get to our country, they're placed in hotels.
There's a division. Now, we normally add injury time to the end of any debate like this.
Yeah.
So as soon as everybody's back, I'll be in the chair again, and any time we've lost through the vote, we'll be recouped. Thank you.
Spend for 15 minutes.
So 15 minutes. Okay, we'll resume the debate. The debate will carry on now till 4:15. Obviously, we've got that injury time, so I'll call Lee Anderson to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. And once the illegal migrants, and let's get the wording right, they are illegal migrants, get into this country, there's no way they're ever going to be deported, only in very rare circumstances. But the most important thing for me is to get the terminology right. They are illegal migrants. They are young men coming into our country. And quite frankly, and you can say what you want about me, I don't want these people in my country. They have broken into our country. They have thrown their documents away. They're undocumented. We don't know where they've come from. We don't know what they've been up to in their own countries. We don't know whether or not they're criminals. We don't know what their intentions are when they get here. And we are a soft touch. These are illegal migrants posing as asylum seekers. And we've heard some horrific cases over the past 2 years of some of these illegal migrants being granted asylum status and then going on to commit horrific crimes. Again, abusing our asylum system. We hear reports, I get the reports as a Member of Parliament, and I know my colleagues do, of young undocumented men roaming around our town centres, intimidating people. This has got to stop. Yet we see the NGOs, we see the lefty lawyers, we see the Labour Party, all together, they're encouraging these illegal migrants to come over the channel by using this same old slogan, smash the gangs. And I'm telling everybody in this room that this smash the gangs is a complete nonsense. You have to stop the pull factor for people coming to this country. These young men in northern France, and I've been to the camps, as I said before, once they get into the channel, they're in this country. We may stop 100 boats in a month, but those same people will get onto another boat and keep coming. And once they're in this country, they're absolutely going nowhere. And they are costing us an absolute fortune. At the same time as we're waiting for a vote to rob our pensioners of their winter fuel payment, supported by the government, we are spending nearly £6–7 billion a year on illegal migration. Now, I've got about a minute left, but I'll tell you a quick story. In 1941, my granddad, Charles William Waterfield, he left the Nottinghamshire coalfields. He left the pit before mining became a reserved occupation. He put a uniform on and he went to North Africa. And he left a wife and 2 children behind to fight for king and country. He did that. He didn't run away. He didn't go to another country and leave his wife and children behind, which is exactly what these young men are doing. They're leaving women and children behind in a supposedly war-torn country. And quite frankly, I don't want these sort of people in my country, and neither does the vast majority of the British public. Thank you.
Conscious of who's here, I'll call Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate and for his excellent speech, and the Minister as well for her appointment to the Home Office. She won the lottery with the job she's been given. The starting principle of a functioning immigration system is that it has to work in the interest of the citizens of this country, and we must decide who comes here. Illegal immigration destroys this principle for all the reasons set out by my honourable friend in his speech. And that's why we must have no tolerance for the channel crossings, and why we need a policy that breaks the link between entering the country illegally and staying here for good thereafter. Just before the summer recess, the Home Secretary made a statement in which she set out the government's policy on illegal immigration, in which she would get rid of deterrence through deportation to third countries and scrapping the retrospective element of the duty to remove that was set out in the Illegal Migration Act 2023. She said her policy was instead to consider the asylum claims of all the illegal immigrants subject to the retrospective duty, and admitted in the impact assessment, if not her speech, that this meant granting asylum to up to 70% of them. I'll come to the costs of this decision, but I want to address the claims that she made about the costs of the previous government's policy, because the Home Secretary claimed that by making the change, she was able to save the taxpayer £700 million a year for a decade, and Labour MPs are repeating this statistic, not knowing that they've been sold a pup. because the claim is clearly ridiculous. And word soon reached me after that statement that Home Office officials were appalled that it had been used. And if any Labour MPs want to dispute that, I would suggest that their ministers speak to the Home Office civil servants as often as I do. I wrote to the Permanent Secretary upon that news and went through the impact assessment. The numbers were the result of what might be called the Reeves method, because they were a work of political fiction. We know, for example, the Home Secretary's calculation double-counted costs. On the one hand, Sir Matthew Rycroft, in his letter to me, told me it included expenses for implementing the Rwanda policy, while on the other hand, the impact assessment assumed Rwanda would never be implemented. Indeed, the impact assessment assumed not a single migrant would be deported under the Conservative policy, and migrants would have stayed in hotels for 10 years, which is clearly an absurd proposition. Yet with Labour's policy, it excluded massive costs from welfare bills to housing policy, which it admitted as significant and could undermine this impact assessment. Yet the results of the impact assessment were presented to the House of Commons like unquestionable fact. The impact assessment reveals the real government policy, which is to deal with the huge numbers of claims by accepting them and deal with the costs by hiding the numbers from the public in the welfare system. The Home Office admits 63,053 illegal immigrants previously due to be deported will have their asylum claims heard instead, and up to 70% of them, that's 44,137 people, will be successful. But it also admits that for those refused, the scale and timing of removals is highly uncertain, and the Home Office may continue to support a number of them. These figures are just the beginning, because they apply only to one cohort of migrants, with the duty to remove unlikely ever to be implemented by Labour, unless the Minister corrects me by naming a start date today. The Home Office admits its policy is expected to increase the number of asylum claims, which consequently, and this is a quote, increases costs. Instead of facing deportation, hundreds of thousands more migrants will stay here for good. The policy is to shift migrants from the Home Office budget, where the costs are published clearly, and into the welfare and local authority budgets, where the costs are not published clearly. Any asylum seekers who are granted asylum will have full access to the welfare system, the impact assessment says, and local authorities will, quotes, also incur costs. So lacking in transparency is this approach that the impact assessment says the Home Office has not been able to establish a generally usable figure. This is obviously ridiculous. We know from studies in Europe that the average channel migrant will be a net lifetime recipient of public funding, not a contributor. In a Danish government study, immigrants from the Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan and Turkey were shown to cost, and this is a net figure, around £10,000 per year. A study at the University of Amsterdam calculated that over a lifetime, the average asylum migrant costs the Dutch public over £400,000. So on that basis, for those granted asylum in just this one cohort, the lifetime cost of Labour's new policy is £17.8 billion, which is far more than the bogus £7 billion figure cited by the Home Secretary, which she said was the cost of the duty to remove policy. With hundreds of thousands more people claiming asylum here in the next 4 to 5 years, the final cost of the new Labour policy will be many multiples more expensive than that. That's the reality of the government's illegal immigration policy. The result will be more illegal immigration, not less, and vastly higher costs, not less. And for that, we will pay the price.
Okay, thank you. I call Mike Tapp.
Apologies for my late arrival after the vote. Look, Dover and Deal is my constituency, so I've been engaging on this serious issue for a number of years now, and it means a lot to my constituents. And the Labour Party has made it really clear that what matters to voters matters to us too, and that's why we're taking this so seriously. In 2018, 299 crossed on small boats. Since then, we've had 136,000 crossings. The asylum backlog has reached record highs, and that has cost £8 million a day in hotels. Earlier on, you made the point that we would speed up the processing and therefore grant more asylum claims. Well, the alternative is to have a backlog taking 5 years, costing us £8 million a day. And we'll also be deporting those that shouldn't be here, which is what the Conservatives have completely failed to do. So our plan is sensible, it's pragmatic. The Border Security Command, as I touched on earlier, is not the same as what was previously in place, which dealt with those arriving at the borders. It will work upstream, bringing in counter-terror powers. Let's give that a chance. We've had 8 weeks, so I'm quite surprised to even be having this debate right now. We've had 13 flights off the ground. One of those was the largest on record, and I think that is a show of intent as to exactly how seriously we're taking this. My final point that I'll make is that the Labour Party has strong values on this. We believe in secure borders, but we play the ball, not the player. Those seeking a better life are doing nothing wrong, but we will secure the borders and take out the smuggling gangs. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to relax the time limit from probably 5 or 6 minutes, more to like 7 to 8. So you'll have a bit longer. I know that doesn't help those who've already spoken, but they obviously spoke before the vote. Okay.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It's a pleasure to serve under you, and hopefully I'll stick within 5 minutes, just about. When we see pictures of boats entering Dover, packed full of supposedly desperate asylum seekers, I want to ask, where are the women? Where are the children? The craft are filled almost exclusively with men, young men. How did they secure the rumoured £5,000 to pay for the cost of their crossing? Even by the Home Office's own figures, in 2022, 87% of these people were men. We must be abundantly clear and honest with the British people. These are foreign males looking to take advantage of our soft borders and our incompetent establishment. They are not, in the vast majority of cases, people genuinely fleeing war and persecution. Now we're told we should refer to these people as irregular migrants. Language matters. The vast majority of these men are not irregular or asylum seekers. They are illegal immigrants and should be labelled as such. And what have we done with these males who have illegally entered our country? Unchecked, undocumented, unknown individuals. We've spread them across the UK, often putting them up in luxury accommodation, all at our expense, damaging the fabric of our country, and particularly my constituency, Great Yarmouth. They're free to come and go as they please. Why? If any do reach our shores, they should be securely detained until rapid deportation can be arranged. Allowing thousands and thousands of foreign young men free rein across our country is pure, unadulterated insanity. The public are furious. In no way does that justify any violence, but we must accept the reasons behind so much of the anger. Starmer has misread the room badly. This fury will not dissipate until the crisis is taken seriously by this government. The boats could be stopped virtually overnight with the correct will. Put the Navy in the Channel, send the boats back to France, and ensure that nobody setting foot here illegally stays.
What's wrong with that?
That means deportations, and lots of them. The Australians deployed a zero-tolerance approach. It worked. We must do the same, and urgently. The first step to delivering is to declare a national emergency. Send a message to the illegal migrants and the smugglers. A clear message. If you come illegally, and you are not welcome. Until that happens, more and more will come. Does the Prime Minister have the political will to tackle this crisis? The British public will not forgive him and his colleagues for failure to deliver now. Tony Blair opened the floodgates via the Human Rights Act in 1997. The Tories accelerated the process, and he must now close them as a matter of urgency. Illegal migration is mortally damaging our sovereign nation, and I would like to know from the government, given that the department you refer to is having trouble maintaining its staff, as do most government departments that I have experience of, none of us believe that smashing the gangs has any hope of getting any traction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
People, if they wish to speak, please to bob or stand. Okay, I call Nigel Farage.
Thank you very much indeed, and I thank the honourable member for Harborough for calling this debate. He must find it excruciatingly embarrassing how badly the previous government dealt with this issue. With my strong connection in Kent and Sussex with the commercial fishing industry, the angling trade and indeed the lifeboats, I started to feel in early 2020 that the odd boat that had crossed, as the honourable member from Dover mentioned, in 2018 and 19, that something big was about to happen, that the gangs had realised that your chances of deportation from this country were very low. And so I went out repeatedly from Dover into the English Channel, filming boats, meeting face-to-face boatfuls of the young men that have been described, in many cases very aggressive young males. But I also got to the bottom of the use of the word escorts. I kept being told that escorts were crossing the channel. I wasn't quite sure what they meant to begin with, but then I understood it was the French Navy, that the French Navy literally escorted boats across the English Channel and handed them over to Border Force or RNLI. So I made a bit of a fuss about the whole thing. I said unless something was done, huge numbers would come. I said there might even be an invasion, a word that got me in very big trouble. But given that we're pushing up towards 140,000 that have come, I don't think I misused the word. The efforts of the last government to deal with this were frankly pretty pitiful, and Rwanda might have worked in theory, but of course in practice it was not going to work. All the while we are subject to that court in Strasbourg, as we saw that evening. And more interestingly, the incorporation of the convention into British law means that actually British judges will always rule in favour of ECHR. So we have to face up to that reality. I also believe what we're facing is a national security emergency. When ISIS boasted in 2015 that they would use the Mediterranean to get their operatives into Europe, perhaps the European Union should have taken them more at their word. And it was interesting to note that Sir Keir Starmer himself used the phrase national security emergency during the general election. So he's going to have to act accordingly. Appointing a new border chief commander, yeah, we may get some better intelligence, fine. But you know, the French already, and we have given them hundreds of millions of pounds, the French do stop a lot of dinghies from crossing. They put knives in the dinghies, but the problem is that the prospective illegal immigrants just hide in the dunes and come back the next day. So that isn't going to work. And smashing the gangs, well, I don't know. And I've been hearing for the last 30 years, we're going to smash the drugs gangs in this country. And yet there's more Class A drugs being taken today than there ever were before. You know, a good operative gang working out of those sand dunes in northern France in a reasonable week of weather can expect to make at least €2 million. The financial rewards are very, very high. So really what this comes down to are two things. Number one is political will. Successive Australian prime ministers attempted to deal with the problem. They all failed. They tried offshore processing, etc., until in the end, Tony Abbott just towed the boats back to Indonesia. There was international outrage from the UN, the EU, and indeed from the Foreign Office, of course.
Are you aware of the fact that they were still hulled vessels?
Can I just say, if somebody intervenes, you sit down. Thanks.
And if we attempt to do the same, we're likely to kill people in our waters. Is that what you want to see?
Just a few weeks ago, for the first time, Border Force did an emergency pickup on the other side of the line, and rather than bringing the people back to this country, as previously, you know, Dover Lifeboat had done, Dungeon Lifeboat had done. They actually took them into Calais, all right? So that is the way that we do it. Yes, you're right, these are far flimsier vessels, but the principle that you take people back to from whence they came is the point that I'm trying to make. And we can do this. We can do this under the international law of the sea. We can do this. I would ask, Minister, that given the money we've given to the French, we no longer accept escorts from the French Navy. The day after 12 people died in the Channel, the day after, there was a French naval vessel escorted a dinghy from a couple of hundred yards off Wissant all the way to our 12-mile line. No more French naval escorts, I think, is vital. So we need political will, and the Germans, of course, are now showing it. The Germans will ignore the ECHR. The Germans, by the way, sent a plane back full of young men to Afghanistan the other week. So with political will, with leaving the ECHR, we can solve this. And I would just promise the Labour government one thing. This issue caused great pain to the Conservative Party, and it impacted in the general election. This issue of illegal migration and the crime that it leads to, which is a conversation that's barely started in this country, but a conversation that in France and Germany is now very big, will do massive damage to Labour's electoral chances. You're going to have to get tough, and I'm afraid your leader is going to have to rethink his position on the ECHR. Thank you.
Just before I move on to the front bench contributions, can I just say to some of the newer members, I've heard people say you or name people by name. It's convention that you name either the office that they hold, such as Prime Minister, or the seat which they represent. Okay, just to remind people. I call front bench for the Conservative Party, Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I also give my thanks to the Honourable Member for Harborough, Oadby and Wigston for securing this very important debate today. As he says, people are arriving here confident in the belief that they'll get to stay, and that must change. The cost to the taxpayer is increasingly beyond security, and we're yet to see the targets set by Labour. I want to start my contribution today by echoing the comments made by colleagues about concerns associated with illegal immigration, which are undoubtedly incredibly serious and shared by many of those we represent. The Honourable Member for Rother Valley talked about the real and horrendous human cost of this issue, as we saw in recent weeks, and probably one of the many reasons that we need to work urgently to get a grip on it. The Honourable Member for West Suffolk talked about the bizarre creative accounting put forward by the government in efforts to defend the scrapping of the deportation deterrent, and the fact that moving the costs from one department to another will not solve the problem. The Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth made valid observations about the nature of the many people arriving and their motivations. The Member for Ashfield talked about, well, asked the question of what it is that people are fleeing from France and the important need to stop that pull factor that draws people to get into those small boats. The Member for Clacton told us of his learnings about escorts, issues that are created by the ECHR, which have been debated many times and will be debated many times in this place in the coming weeks, months, years, and talked about the concerns, rightly, that these pose to national security. With other business going on in the House today, it seems apt to start by looking at the cost of illegal immigration. Asylum accommodation is costing the taxpayer over £8 million a day and now looks set to keep rising. We've seen this government grant an asylum amnesty to 100,000 arrivals without any proper costing on their impact assessment. The government is about priorities. This amnesty is seeing the government pulling up a chair to people who've entered the country illegally at the same time as turning off the heating for our pensioners. Journeys by small boat across the Channel are illegal, dangerous and unnecessary. They're unfair on those who are in genuine need, and as the country's finite capacity is taken up by people coming into the UK from the place of safety in France. Further, it's unfair on the British public due to the huge impact it has on public services. Thanks to the measures brought forward by the last government, in the year June 23 to 24, migrant returns rose by a fifth, enforced returns rose by half, irregular arrivals fell by 26%, and there was a 36% reduction in the asylum backlog. But most importantly, the previous government changed the law so that when people arrived here illegally, they should not be able to claim asylum in the UK and could be returned to their home country or a safe third country. We need a deterrent to discourage people from paying those criminal gangs of people smugglers who profit at the peril of others, to prevent people from leaving that safe country that is France on the assumption of a soft-touch approach here in Britain, to protect our already overburdened public services and housing supply. This government's first act on illegal immigration was to scrap that essential deterrent, a deterrent that the National Crime Agency says is essential to tackling the issue, a deterrent whose removal the former Chief Immigration Officer says will create open season for small boats, a deterrent that is now being looked at by 19 EU countries. I will.
Thank the Minister for allowing me to intervene, but does he agree with me that if the previous Conservative government would have had the political backbone and courage to get that first Rwanda flight off and ignore the ECHR, it might have stopped it?
I think, do you know what? He's walked through those lobbies with me. He's been as frustrated as I have in trying to look for a solution to this problem. And I think the removal of the deterrent is we're basically doing a U-turn on everything we've put forward and everything that looked like it could make a difference. We saw what was happening in Ireland as a result of it. The deterrent would work. If you can arrive in this country and know that you're never going to be sent back, we're going to have a problem. Just this week, Germany asked the EU if they could use the accommodation that we've built, British taxpayers built in Rwanda, so that they can send asylum seekers there. It's clear that the Conservative government was making progress on this issue and that Labour are behind the curve. Labour have wasted taxpayer money on scrapping this deterrent, and now the EU wants to copy the UK's scheme. Usually it's the Labour Party who want to copy the EU. The reality is the new government has no plan to stop the boats and nowhere to send asylum seekers who cannot be returned home. Where are they going to return the people from countries like Afghanistan, Iran and Syria? If it's not Rwanda, is it Romford, is it Richmond, is it Redcar? Labour got through this by-election talking tough and saying they'll smash the gangs, but they're quickly realising it's not a workable policy. Over 8,000 small boats arrivals have landed in the UK since Labour took office, and they still haven't even appointed a head of their new border command. More press releases and warm words simply won't cut it now. They're in government. In recent months, most people in this room will have knocked on thousands of doors, heard the real concerns from residents about what uncontrolled illegal immigration can mean for their community, the pressure on public services and housing, questions around integration, and the tough choices that have to be made about public spending. When the Minister gets to her feet, will she finally tell the House, when did the new Labour government formally tell the Rwandan government the Rwanda scheme was scrapped? What advice has she received from the National Crime Agency about the need for a deterrent? How many more small boat arrivals will cross before they appoint a new border command? And will asylum hotels be reopening in the autumn? And where does she plan to send asylum seekers who cannot be returned home? Thank you, Chair.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to begin by congratulating the member for Harborough, Oadby and Wigston for securing the debate. He just made it in here after voting in several other very important votes, I think, with 30 seconds to go. We were wondering whether the debate would be able to start on time, but he managed to make it here, although somewhat out of breath. But I think that listening to the debate today, the first of many, I'm sure, that we all have in this place and in other places, it strikes me that there are some things that we do agree with across all parties. First of all, we have to stop irregular immigration and deal with the appalling gangs behind the small boat crossings who care only about the profits they make, and profits which fuel other criminal activity, and profits which are careless, to say the least, of the lives that they put at risk in the dangerous crossings that we've seen happen. In the recent past, these gangs have grown increasingly violent. They've been attacking the police and those that they've promised to transport to safely on the beaches in France. So it's vital that we dismantle these gangs and strengthen our border security. I think all of us can agree about that. These crossings have hugely increased in recent years, and the boats are becoming more and more crowded, more and more unseaworthy, and even more dangerous. And this is a point that several members have made during this debate. I'm happy to give way.
She's made some good points, does the Minister, but does she agree with me that whilst the Prime Minister is smashing the gangs, it's going to be more difficult for the boats to get into the sea, therefore more people are going to clamber on the boats and subsequently we'll have more deaths in the Channel?
We have to do what we can, I think, to disrupt this trade. And we have already seen that the boats are becoming more unseaworthy and that more people are getting on them. But actually, I think that just because this is happening, this doesn't mean that we should do nothing to get in the way of the supply of boats and engines that criminals are using in order to facilitate this trade. All members in the debate have agreed, even though they haven't agreed on the wherewithal, that we should be doing our best to stop this trade. And no government would want to be out of control of its external borders. I think we all agree about that. And therefore, it's very important that we take a much more sophisticated and integrated approach, Sir Mark, to dealing with these increasingly integrated cross-border gangs. Not leave them to flourish, not leave them to be able to organise and to be able to reach even deeper back into places such as Vietnam, but to deal with them, harass them, disrupt them, do what we can to disrupt their financing as well, so that we can try to get on top of this. And my honourable friend, the member for Dover and Deal, was spot on when he was saying that this has been done before in different contexts, particularly with drugs and international crime, and it can certainly also be done with this particular trade. So I think we should try at least to be a bit more optimistic about the potential for concerted action amongst states, cross-border, to be able to deal with this issue. So I think that an approach, a different approach, has to be workable. We believe it has to respect international law, which is why the government scrapped the partnership with Rwanda. Now, I have to say that the party opposite, and particularly the front bench spokesperson, has been acting like somehow the Rwanda deal was a deterrent. But from the day the Rwanda deal was agreed to the day it was scrapped, more than 84,000 people crossed the Channel in small boats. Now, that doesn't sound to me like a deterrent. And since the Rwanda deal was scrapped, the number of small boat arrivals has gone down 24% when you compare it to the same period last year, and down 40% when you compare it to the same period in 2022. So if that's a deterrent, it's working in an extremely odd way. I'm happy to give way to the honourable member.
Minister, for giving way. On the subject of Rwanda, can she explain why, in the figure presented to the House of Commons by the Home Secretary, the claim that scrapping the retrospective element of the duty to remove would save £700 million a year for 10 years, why, in the calculation of that figure, does the impact assessment assume absolutely no deportations to Rwanda at all, while in the letter to me from the Home Office Permanent Secretary, he says included in that number is the cost of removing people to Rwanda?
I haven't seen the letter to the honourable gentleman, but I'm happy to write him if he wants a further explanation. But I do think we have to remember that in its 3 years in existence, the Rwanda scheme cost hundreds of millions of pounds, we were going to pay £150 million, £150,000 per person deported to Rwanda. That was part of the agreement. And in those 3 years, only 4 people were sent to Kigali, and they went voluntarily. So I don't think that the party opposite's view that somehow the Rwanda scheme was an answer to all of their problems and prayers is borne out by the experience of it. And I don't think that scrapping it has made a blind bit of difference to the desire of some people to wish to get into this country. And so I'm happy to give way.
Just on the Rwanda scheme, does the Honourable Member agree with what we now know in the press, the reports of comments of the now Shadow Home Secretary and the Home Secretary, who clearly understood that the Rwanda scheme would never work, the leader of the opposition, who was the Prime Minister when he was the Chancellor, who clearly thought this scheme wasn't work, and in the 3 years of its existence, it didn't work. So the fact that Conservative members sitting opposite are still clutching onto the Rwanda scheme now doesn't bode particularly well for their prospects of coming back into reality.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend about his observations. I think the important thing, instead of clutching onto something that clearly was very expensive and hasn't worked, is to get down to doing the day job, because what actually happened while the I will in a minute, but what actually happened while the Rwanda scheme was being developed is the Home Office stopped doing a lot of the other things that it should be doing. Returns completely plummeted. There were a range of people that the Illegal Immigration Act made it impossible to be properly processed, who were literally just sitting in our country in hotels costing £8 million a day, being unable to be processed. And I think there are no easy answers in this space, and I don't expect I'm the first, and I certainly know I won't be the last Minister for Illegal Immigration and Asylum to say that there aren't any easy fixes to this. But you do have to, Sir Mark, in this space, be able to administer a system, work on doing it, deal with returns, deal with all of the things that you have to do to make the asylum system outcome meaningful. If the asylum system outcome is that you failed, then you should be returned if the country is safe. There should be a consequence to the asylum decision. And government has a duty to make certain that the way that the asylum system works is speeded up to be made fair, but also that if there's an outcome that you might not want as an asylum seeker, that there is a consequence for it. I'm happy to give way.
To give way, I wonder if I could just press her on the really specific question I was asking about third countries, which is, given Tony Blair's advocacy for it, given the fact that so many of the European countries are agreeing third country agreements, for obvious reasons, that there are countries that you don't necessarily want to return people to, even if they are failed asylum seekers. Can I just ask, is the government ruling out any such third country agreements of the kind that so many European states are arranging at the moment?
I'm unsure what sort of third country agreements the honourable member is talking to. I'll give way to him in a minute. There are various different agreements that might be relevant here, such as the return agreement to Albania, and hopefully work that we're doing with Vietnam to return people. But returns for failed asylum seekers and those who have no right to be here are an important part of making sure the system works properly. But I suspect he's going down another line. So if he wants to...
And thank you for giving way again. It's kind of you, of the Honourable Lady, rather. No, the question is not so much about return agreements. It's about third country agreements, where someone who is a failed asylum seeker in this country, or someone who wants to seek asylum in this country, is either sent, having failed, to a third country that is not their home country, or has their processing done in those countries. The kind of agreement that Tony Blair argued for, the kind of agreements that, for example, the Italians already have up and running and that so many European countries are working to set up.
I don't think that at this stage, 8-9 weeks into the job, I would want to rule out any such thing. But there are some tests that would have to be applied to it, Sir Mark, that it would have to be in keeping with international law, certainly, and that we would have to make sure that it was value for money, and that it had a reasonable chance of working. But I don't want to come here at this stage of this government's life and rule anything out. But there would have to be certain issues that we'd have to think about, such as according with international law and being good value for money that would apply in any such future potential scheme. But the key priority for the government at the moment is to deal with the channel crossings in small boats, which is why we are focusing on creating the Border Security Command, which will help us get a grip on this very, very difficult but important issue. Now, Border Force itself maintains 100% checks for all scheduled arriving passengers into the UK, and it in fact facilitated 129 million passenger arrivals last year. The UK is recognised as a global leader in the use of automation at the border, embracing innovation to simplify processes for legitimate travellers, including families, alongside improving the security and biosecurity of the UK. So as part of an ongoing development of the entire system, we will extend the use of such automation, such as passport gates and e-gates at the UK border. But we need, therefore, also to stop those who come here in an irregular manner. And Border Security Command will bring together our intelligence and enforcement agencies with hundreds of new cross-border police investigators and prosecutors. They will be equipped with new powers to disrupt and dismantle criminal networks upstream and to prevent the boats from reaching the French coast in the first place. This will be led by a new Border Security Commander who will provide cross-system strategic leadership and directions across several agencies. That includes the National Crime Agency, Border Force, policing, our intelligence community, immigration enforcement, and the Crown Prosecution Service. The work is advancing on the planned Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, which will be introduced at the earliest opportunity to this House, and I'm sure I may see some of you in perhaps the Standing Committee and the processes as that bill makes its way through this place. Now, the Sandhurst Agreement, signed by the last government, is important, and we've always supported it. But it doesn't go far enough. It focuses on the French beaches. We should be stopping the gangs and the boats long before they get that far. This is a threat to our security, and so that should be reflected in our approach. Our cooperation with key international partners must be as robust as it is for terrorism and other security threats. So we'll be looking for closer partnerships with different and better ways of making these criminals pay. We've already spoken to the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, to interior ministers in Italy, Germany and Turkey about how to strengthen operations against criminal gangs. We've begun supplying other European countries with more intelligence that the UK has gathered on people smuggling into their countries. And we support Italy in its Rome process. Irregular arrivals to Italy decreased 17% in the year ending June 2024 compared to the previous year. But we lack important information and are seeking much stronger data sharing agreements with partner companies. That is how we, countries. That is how we can actually ensure that the intelligence that we share can deal with some of the cross-border threats. Those with no right to be here must be removed. The government's established a new returns and enforcement programme to ensure that asylum and immigration rules are properly respected and enforced. By the end of the year, more of those with no right to be here, including foreign criminals and failed asylum seekers, will have been removed than in any other 6-month period over the last 5 years. We have also, as my honourable friend said, had 13 bespoke return flights which have been chartered since the 5th of July, returning individuals to a range of countries including Albania, Poland, Romania, Vietnam and Timor-Leste. I'm happy to.
Point I raised earlier about what the government's target is. The Honourable Lady talked about getting to the highest 6 monthly rate for the end of this year. What is the government's longer-term target? If you were to believe what the Home Secretary said when she was the Shadow Home Secretary, you're going to reverse and get back up to the level of deportations we had in 2010. That's the logical reading of what she said. Is that the government's target? Are you going to get deportations back to 2010 levels?
Well, we certainly have the ambition to do so. I think if we have a look, returns have plummeted during the period where the last government was in office. In 2023, 3,225 returns were made. In 2010, we were returning 7,157. And of course, in the meantime, levels of illegal immigration have grown exponentially. So we certainly have the sort of view that we want to return to those kinds of levels and do much, much more to ensure that if you get to the end of the asylum system and you've failed, there will be consequences and that you will be returned. I think that we've also at the same time taking some time to invest in intensive immigration enforcement operations. Over the last few weeks, we've targeted rogue businesses suspected of employing illegal working. More than 275 premises have been targeted, with 135 receiving civil penalty referral notices for employing illegal workers. 85 illegal migrant workers were detained for removal. And we are rapidly expanding this kind of work and certainly have the ambition to continue to do so. We also have voluntary return schemes which we will continue to use in order to reduce the foreign national offender prison population and support the Ministry of Justice in alleviating current prison capacity issues. We're also focusing on those who are serving custodial sentences and on maximising returns directly from prison. We're taking rigorous action against foreign national offenders living in the community by actively monitoring and managing cases and resolving barriers to removal. So it is our intention again to make certain that we can do a lot better than the previous government did in removing foreign national offenders, which is why immigration removal centres, which can play a vital role in controlling our borders, need to be strengthened, and we're increasing our estate capacity to ensure we have enough detention space for swift, firm and fair returns. The government's working at pace to optimise the use of the current immigration return estate in the immediate term and expect to deliver an extra 200 male beds by the end of September. A further 78 beds are expected to be delivered by March next year. Alongside this uplift, we're increasing vital ancillary provisions such as healthcare, legal services and welfare facilities so that we can expedite returns. So Mark, I think this is probably the first of many such debates we'll have. I think actually there's quite a lot we can agree about in terms of the requirement to secure our borders. I can see the honourable members leaping up and down, so I'm happy to give way.
She's going to give way and she's in the middle of her peroration. But I just wondered if I could press her on this point about towing more of the boats back to France. The legal arguments are so strong. The chances of us saving lives at sea are so strong. The legal arguments are absolutely crystal clear. Is it the government's ambition that a greater share of these boats will be towed back to France rather than towed to the UK?
Well, it is a difficult thing to do. And I think that part of what we need to do with our relations with France is do things in cooperation. It's quite difficult to try to work across the border if you alienate the people that you're working with. So any such things have got to be done operationally with agreement. So the cooperation from that point of view is crucial, as is obviously saving life at sea. And if there is any danger with respect to towing boats, it's very, very difficult to intervene in what is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes in a context where the boats that are being put to sea at the moment are extremely flimsy and are actually falling apart in the water, often as we saw tragically last week, containing people with no effective life jackets and no way of staying afloat. So we have to be very, very careful. So I would say we have to work with our colleagues in France and cooperate operationally about where we take those people who are in the water. And many are returned to France, as it happens, if rescues happen in French territorial waters. And so it's a balance, and I will certainly something that I will keep under review, and happy to keep the honourable gentleman in touch with thinking as it develops. Sir Mark, I was on my peroration when I was interrupted in a very polite way by the honourable gentleman. I'd like to congratulate him once more for securing this debate. I'd like to congratulate and thank everyone who's contributed to it, and I know that this is an issue to which we will return.
Okay, thank you. I now call on Neil O'Brien to wind up the debate.
Well, thank you very much, Sir Mark, and thank you so much to all those members who have taken part in what I thought was a good-tempered and interesting debate in which many made good and important contributions. There were actually many things I did agree with in what the Minister said. She made the important point about the powerful link to wider criminality from these criminal gangs who operate the illegal trade across the Channel. Her comments give me the opportunity to also thank some of our European partners who we've been working with intensely over the last couple of years, particularly in Bulgaria, to stop the flow of boats and engines to the criminal gang. This is a shared European challenge which is only going to grow over time because of the growth of the population, and particularly the young population in these countries of origin. So there were things we did agree on, and of the 5 questions I asked, I thought we got some interesting answers. On data, I'm afraid we didn't hear much. There's lots of interesting pieces of data that the government really should be publishing and is not at the moment. I'd really encourage the Minister to start publishing things that the public really deserve to know. On the deportations target, which said they had ambition to get back to 2010 levels, I will support anything that will increase levels of deportations. In terms of third country agreements, I thought it was interesting that the Minister did not rule out signing third country agreements of the kind that other European countries have got, and I would encourage her to get on with it and go as fast as she can towards doing that. On this question of towing boats back to France, again, the Minister said it was tricky and she was thinking about it. I would encourage her to really go for it, because that will profoundly help us to disrupt the business model of the people smugglers. But the thing we didn't really get into, and I thought was interesting in some of the comments of Labour members, was this point about the underlying causes, the pull factors, the reasons why so many people come, because they know they'll be able to stay. There was some interesting and important contributions about enforcement, but I would encourage members here to listen to 3 Tonys. One is a Labour politician, one's a Liberal, one's a civil servant. The 3 are Tony Smith, the head of Border Force, who said that enforcement on its own is never going to be enough, and he's right about that. And he says it's rash to scrap the Rwanda scheme. The other Tony we got to listen to is Tony Blair, who was trying to set up third country agreements, and I think that will hopefully persuade Labour politicians that they need to be doing the same thing. Even Tony Blair agrees that this is the right thing to do. And the third is Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister, who pioneered interception at sea and ended their small boats crisis by towing these boats back to third countries, as we should be doing here between the UK and France. So there are things we can agree on. There are things that I think the government says about enforcement that sort of imply that no one's thought of enforcement before, that we've never worked with lots of European countries before. We have, we've been doing this for years. But that on its own is not enough. At some point, the Minister, perhaps it's already happened, will realise that this is the case, and hope that when she does, that she will join us in thinking about how we can tackle the underlying reasons why so many people are getting into these deadly boats and putting money into the hands of dangerous criminals to risk their lives to cross to this country.
Okay, thank you. The question is that this House has considered illegal immigration. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you, everyone.